I've been a real estate agent for 8 years, and I thought I'd seen everything from structural damage to undisclosed deaths. But what I discovered beneath the craftsman-style home at 1247 Elm Drive in Ridgeway still makes my hands shake when I think about it. It was March 15, 2023, when I first met the Henderson family. They were relocating from Chicago for David's job transfer, and they'd fallen in love with this 1950s home online. The listing photos showed beautiful hardwood floors, original crown molding, and a spacious backyard perfect for their twin daughters. The price was slightly below market value, which should have been my first red flag. The previous owner, Harold Mackenzie, had lived there for 37 years before passing away from natural causes 6 months earlier. His estate wanted a quick sale, and everything seemed straightforward. Harold had been a retired municipal worker, quiet and unremarkable according to the neighbors I'd spoken with. The morning of the final walk-through, I arrived at the property in my 2019 Honda Accord to meet the Hendersons. David was there with his wife Sarah, both excited about closing later that afternoon. The inspection had been clean, the appraisal came in at asking price, and their financing was approved. "Just want to double-check the basement utilities one more time," David said, pulling out his phone's flashlight. "I noticed some of the electrical looked older during our first visit." I led them down the narrow wooden stairs into the basement. The foundation was solid concrete, with exposed beams supporting the floor above. The furnace, water heater, and electrical panel were all in good working order. David was examining the circuit breaker when Sarah called out from the far corner. "There's a manhole cover back here," she said, sounding puzzled. "That's weird for a residential basement, isn't it?" I walked over to where she was standing. Sure enough, there was a circular metal cover set into the concrete floor, about 3 feet in diameter. It had the standard crosshatch pattern and looked like it belonged in a city street, not someone's basement. "Could be an old septic access or storm drain," I suggested, though I'd never seen anything like it in a residential property. "Harold worked for the city water department for decades. Maybe he had some equipment stored down there." David joined us, crouching down to examine the cover. "There are fresh scraped marks around the edges," he observed. "Like someone's been opening this recently." The metal cover had a recessed handle, and when David pulled on it, it lifted easily. Too easily for something that should have been sealed for decades. A wooden ladder descended into darkness below, disappearing beyond the reach of our phone lights. "I'm going down there," David announced, already swinging his leg over the edge. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said quickly. "We don't know what's down there, and we're closing in 4 hours. If there's a structural issue..." But David was already climbing down. His voice echoed from below. "It's a room. A finished room. There's electricity." Sarah and I exchanged glances. This wasn't mentioned in any of the property disclosures. I climbed down after David, my dress shoes slipping slightly on the wooden rungs. The space below was nothing like I expected. It was a fully finished room, maybe 12 feet square, with drywall painted in institutional green. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the floor was covered in brown carpet that smelled of cigarettes and something else, something sour and medicinal. But it was the walls that made my blood run cold. Every surface was covered with photographs. Hundreds of them. They showed the neighborhood from every angle: houses, yards, windows, driveways. But not the kind of photos you take for a real estate listing or neighborhood newsletter. These were surveillance photos, taken with a telephoto lens from concealed positions. Photos of neighbors in their yards, walking their dogs, getting their mail. Photos taken through windows, people in their kitchens, living rooms, bedrooms. Photos of children playing in backyards, families having barbecues, couples arguing on their porches. David was standing frozen in the center of the room, staring at a wall of filing cabinets. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "you need to see this." The filing cabinets were labeled with addresses. Every house on Elm Drive had its own folder, some going back decades. I opened the one labeled 1251 Elm Drive, the house next door to the property we were buying. Inside were detailed type notes about the residents, work schedules, daily routines, family relationships, visitors, personal habits. There were copies of mail, credit reports, employment records. Someone had been documenting every aspect of his neighbors' lives for years. "This is insane," Sarah called from above. "You guys need to get out of there right now." I pulled out my phone to call the police, but had no signal in the underground room. The walls seemed to be closing in as I realized the scope of what we'd discovered. This wasn't just a creepy hobby, this was systematic stalking and identity theft on a massive scale. David was looking through another file cabinet, his face pale. "The locks," he whispered. "He has detailed notes about everyone's locks, security systems, daily schedules. And look at this." He held up a small plastic bag containing what looked like house keys. Dozens of them, all labeled with addresses. That's when I noticed the camera equipment in the corner: professional-grade telephoto lenses, night vision scopes, and what appeared to be listening devices. There was also a desk with a computer that was still plugged in, though it was password protected. "We need to leave now," I said, my voice shaking. "This is a crime scene." As we climbed back up the ladder, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The house suddenly felt different, not like a home, but like a hide in a hunter's blind. Every window seemed like a vantage point, every shadow a place where someone could observe without being seen. Sarah was already on her phone with 911 when we reached the main floor. The police arrived within 15 minutes, followed by detectives and a forensics team. The closing was postponed indefinitely while they processed the scene. Over the next week, the investigation revealed that Harold Mackenzie had been operating his surveillance network for over 2 decades. He'd used his position with the city water department to access public records, and his quiet demeanor had made him virtually invisible to his neighbors. The computer contained terabytes of photos, videos, and personal information on more than 50 families. He'd been selling identity information to criminal networks and had apparently been planning something much worse before his death. The Hendersons decided not to purchase the house, and I don't blame them. But what haunts me most isn't just what we found, it's wondering how many other Harold Mackenzies are out there, quietly documenting our lives from the shadows. The case is still ongoing, and I've learned that 3 other houses in the neighborhood had similar underground rooms, all connected by tunnels that ran beneath the storm drain system. What I thought was an isolated incident was actually part of something much bigger. Have you ever noticed someone who seems to know too much about your daily routine? What's the strangest thing you've discovered about your neighbors? Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who make themselves invisible. I'm a home inspector, and I've been in this business for 12 years. After what happened at the Hendersons' place on Elm Drive made local news, I started getting calls from families who wanted their new properties thoroughly checked for hidden surprises. That's how I met the Garcias, and what we found in their backyard bunker connects to something much darker than anyone realized. It was June 14, 2023, when Maria Garcia called my office. She and her husband Carlos had just closed on a ranch-style home at 2156 Oak Street in Clearwater, about 40 miles from Ridgeway. They'd heard about the surveillance room discovery and wanted a complete inspection of their new property, including any spaces that might not be immediately obvious. "We have 2 young kids," Maria explained over the phone. "After hearing about that neighbor who was watching people for decades, we need to know our property is safe." I drove out to their place in my 2020 Ford F-150, arriving on a foggy morning that made the whole neighborhood feel isolated. The house was a modest 1960s ranch with a large backyard that backed up to undeveloped woodland. Carlos met me at the front door, looking tired despite the early hour. "We've been hearing noises at night," he said without preamble. "Footsteps, maybe equipment running. Our realtor said it was probably just the house settling or maybe animals in the woods, but after the Elm Drive discovery, you're not taking any chances," I finished. The interior inspection was routine, electrical systems were updated, plumbing was solid, and the HVAC had been recently serviced. But as I worked through the house, I noticed several things that struck me as odd. The grocery bills stuck to the refrigerator showed food purchases for significantly more people than the Garcia family of 4. The water meter readings indicated usage consistent with 5 or 6 people, not 4. How long has the previous owner been gone? I asked Carlos as we moved outside to inspect the exterior. Walter Brennan moved out 2 months ago, Carlos replied. Went to some retirement community in Arizona, according to the realtor. He'd lived here for 15 years, kept to himself mostly. The backyard was spacious, with mature oak trees and a small shed near the back fence. But as I walked the perimeter, I noticed something that made me pause. There were worn paths in the grass leading to seemingly random spots, not the kind of paths you'd expect from normal yard maintenance or landscaping. Carlos, have you been back to that shed yet? I asked. No, Walter said he'd cleared everything out, but we've been focused on unpacking the house. The shed was locked with a new padlock, which was strange if the previous owner had supposedly cleared out all his belongings. But more concerning was the heavy-duty electrical cable running from the house to the shed, far more power than you'd need for basic yard tools. Using my bolt cutters, I opened the padlock. Inside, the shed was empty except for a circuit breaker panel and what appeared to be a ventilation system. But the floor had a seam running around the edges, and when I examined it closely, I realized it wasn't a floor at all, it was a hinged cover. Maria! Carlos called toward the house. You need to see this! When the 3 of us lifted the heavy wooden cover, we found metal stairs leading down into a concrete bunker. The space was fully furnished: a bed, small refrigerator, microwave, chemical toilet, and shelves stocked with canned goods and bottled water. It was clean, organized, and recently used. Someone's been living down here, I said, my voice echoing in the underground space. Recently. That's when we heard footsteps above us. Heavy boots on the wooden floor of the shed. Hello? A voice called down. I can explain. A man in his 60s appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing work clothes and carrying a small duffel bag. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent years working outdoors, and his eyes had the same calculating quality I'd seen in the surveillance photos from the Elm Drive case. Walter Brennan, he said, climbing down the stairs like he owned the place. I guess you found my backup plan. Carlos immediately stepped protectively in front of his wife. What are you doing on our property? We bought this house. You're supposed to be in Arizona. Walter laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Arizona was just what I told the realtor. I built this bunker in 2018, right after the Ridgeway situation started getting complicated. Harold Mackenzie wasn't the only one with contingency plans. The mention of Harold's name made my blood run cold. You knew Harold Mackenzie? We worked together for 23 years at the water department. Same crew, same routes, same interests. Walter's eyes moved between us, calculating. Harold was good at collecting information, but he never thought about what would happen if his operation got discovered. That's why I built this place as an insurance policy. Maria pulled out her phone, but Walter shook his head. No signal down here. I learned that trick from Harold too. But don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to collect some things and I'll be gone. Collect what things? Carlos demanded. Walter gestured to a section of the bunker we hadn't noticed: filing cabinets identical to the ones found in Harold's basement. Your neighborhood files. I've been documenting Oak Street for 8 years. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about people when you have unlimited access to their water usage patterns, service calls, and utility records. He opened one of the filing cabinets, revealing folders for every house on the street. The Garcia family had a thick file labeled 2156 Oak Street, new residence. You've been watching us since we moved in, Maria whispered. Someone has to maintain the database, Walter replied matter-of-factly. Harold's arrest left a significant gap in our coverage area. The buyers for our information don't care about jurisdictional boundaries. I was slowly reaching for my phone, hoping to at least record what he was saying, when Walter continued talking. The network is bigger than people realize. Harold was just one collector in a 5-county operation. municipal workers, cable technicians, mail carriers, anyone with legitimate access to neighborhoods and homes. We've been building comprehensive profiles for over a decade. Profiles for what? Carlos asked. Identity theft, primarily. But also for people who need detailed information about specific families' custody disputes, divorce proceedings, insurance fraud investigations. There's a surprising market for knowing exactly when someone leaves for work, what they buy, who visits them, what their routines are. Walter began loading files into his duffel bag. I'll be gone in 10 minutes. You can call the police after that if you want, but I'd recommend you don't. The bunker is well built and completely legal. It's on your property now, so technically you're responsible for its contents. You're insane if you think we're going to let you just walk away, Carlos said. Walter paused his packing and looked at us seriously. Harold thought he was untouchable too. But when the heat got too intense, having an exit strategy became very important. I've been planning this transition for months. He finished loading his bag and headed toward the stairs. The bunker is yours now. I'd suggest you fill it in, but that's your choice. Just know that your family's information is already in the database. Changing the locks won't change that. As Walter climbed the stairs, he called back. By the way, your daughter Emma walks to school the same route every day, and your son Miguel has soccer practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Maria works late on Wednesdays, and Carlos, you always forget to lock the back door when you take the trash out on Thursday nights. We waited until we heard his footsteps fade before climbing out of the bunker. By the time we reached the surface, Walter Brennan was gone, and we never saw him again. The police investigation revealed that Walter had been using the bunker as a base of operations for 3 years, accessing the Garcia house through a tunnel that connected to the basement. He'd been living beneath their property, documenting their lives, and maintaining Harold Mackenzie's surveillance network. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. When investigators mapped the locations of all the documented addresses, they realized the network covered a much larger area than anyone had suspected. And Walter's mention of 5-county operation suggested that what happened in Ridgeway and Clearwater was just the beginning. The Garcia family moved out 2 weeks later, and the house remains empty. But I keep thinking about what Walter said, that the network is bigger than people realize, and that changing the locks won't change what's already in their database. Have you ever felt like someone knows too much about your daily routine? What would you do if you discovered someone had been secretly living on your property? Sometimes the most dangerous neighbors are the ones you never see. I'm a telecommunications technician, and I've been installing cable and internet systems for 9 years. After the Ridgeway and Clearwater discoveries, I started noticing things about house layouts that I'd never paid attention to before. When I got the service call for 3428 Pine Road in Brookside, I thought it was just another routine installation. I was wrong. It was September 19, 2023, when I pulled up to the address in my 2018 Chevrolet Express van. The customer was Tom Mitchell, a software engineer who just moved from Portland. He bought the house sight unseen during the pandemic housing boom, based only on virtual tours and inspection reports. I need Ethernet wired to my home office, Tom explained as he led me through the house. The previous owner said the house was pre-wired, but I can't find any active connections. The house was a custom-built contemporary from 1995, with an unusual layout that immediately caught my attention. Large windows faced the neighboring property at odd angles, and interior walls seemed positioned to create clear sight lines between rooms. The home office Tom wanted wired had floor-to-ceiling windows facing directly toward the house next door. Who designed this place? I asked, examining the electrical plans. The previous owner built it himself, Tom replied. Robert Caldwell. He was some kind of contractor or architect. Lived here for 28 years before selling to me. As I began running cable through the walls, I noticed the house had an unusual amount of existing wiring, far more than typical for a 1995 build. There were cable runs that didn't connect to any visible outlets, and junction boxes hidden behind access panels throughout the house. Tom, have you found any of these mystery cables yet? I called from the basement. No, but I've been wondering about them. There are also these weird alcoves in several rooms that don't seem to serve any purpose. I climbed back upstairs to look at what he meant. In the living room, dining room, and master bedroom, there were small recessed areas in the walls about the size of a shoebox, with removable panels. They were positioned at eye level and angled toward the windows. These look like equipment mounting points, I said, examining the electrical connections inside each alcove. Professional-grade power, data, and what looks like video output. Tom frowned. Equipment for what? That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. From the neighbor's house next door, these alcoves would be perfectly positioned for telephoto camera lenses. The windows, the room layouts, even the furniture placement seemed designed to provide optimal viewing angles from the adjacent property. Tom, who lives next door? Nobody right now. It's been empty since I moved in. The realtor said the owner moved to a retirement community. I stepped outside to examine the neighboring house. It was an older colonial-style home with a clear view into Tom's property. Several windows on the second floor had small holes drilled through the screens exactly the right size for camera lenses. We need to check something, I told Tom. Do you have a ladder? Using Tom's extension ladder, I climbed up to examine the neighbor's second-floor windows more closely. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Each window had been modified with professional-grade camera mounting systems, and there were cable runs leading from each position down into the house. Tom! I called down. You need to see this. Inside the neighbor's house, which was unlocked, we found what could only be described as a surveillance command center. The second floor had been converted into a monitoring station with multiple screens, recording equipment, and filing systems that looked identical to the ones discovered in Ridgeway and Clearwater. The files were organized by date and activity, going back to 1995. Every resident who'd lived in Tom's house had been documented, photographed, and cataloged. The current files showed that Tom had been under surveillance since the day he moved in. This is impossible, Tom whispered, looking at recent photos of himself working in his home office, cooking dinner, watching TV. Robert Caldwell built my house specifically to spy on whoever lived there. The evidence was overwhelming. Architectural plans showed that Robert had designed Tom's house as the perfect surveillance target, then built his own house to serve as the monitoring station. For nearly 3 decades, he'd been documenting the lives of his unknowing neighbors. But the most disturbing discovery was a detailed file labeled Network Integration Phase 2. It contained plans to expand the surveillance operation to other custom-built homes throughout the county, each designed by Robert Caldwell Construction. He's been building surveillance-ready houses for years, I realized, looking at the architectural plans. Every house he's designed has these same features: optimal camera angles, pre-wired monitoring systems, strategic window placement. Tom was staring at a map on the wall showing dozens of properties throughout the region, each marked with construction dates and surveillance status. Our previous discoveries in Ridgeway and Clearwater were marked as compromised. Relocate assets. The network didn't just recruit municipal workers, Tom said quietly. They recruited the builders. That's when we heard a vehicle pulling into the driveway next door. Through the surveillance monitors, we watched a white Ford Transit van park outside, and a familiar figure stepped out: Walter Brennan, the man who'd been living in the Garcias bunker. He's coming back for the equipment, I whispered. We watched Walter enter the house through the back door, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything was located. He began systematically disconnecting and packing surveillance equipment, working quickly but methodically. We need to get out of here, Tom said, but I was already calling 911. Walter must have heard us, because he appeared in the doorway of the surveillance room. I was hoping I'd have more time, he said calmly. Robert's retirement was supposed to give us a clean transition. You're all connected, I said. Harold Mackenzie, Robert Caldwell, the municipal workers. This is organized. Walter nodded. 23 years of careful planning. Robert designed the infrastructure, Harold handled the data collection, and I managed the technical operations. We documented over 400 families across 5 counties. What was the point? Tom demanded. Information is valuable. Identity theft was just the beginning. We sold access to private investigators, divorce attorneys, custody lawyers, insurance fraud investigators, anyone who needed comprehensive surveillance data on specific targets. Walter continued packing equipment. Robert's houses were particularly valuable because the residents never knew they were being watched. Perfect long-term behavioral documentation. The police are on their way, I told him. Walter smiled grimly. I'll be gone long before they arrive. But you should know Robert built 12 houses in this county alone. Tom's house was just the prototype. As Walter loaded the last of his equipment, he turned back to us. The network has been operational for over 2 decades. Shutting down 3 collection points won't stop what's already in motion. We've documented too many people, sold too much information, created too many dependencies. He headed toward the door, then paused. Tom, you should probably move. The next monitoring team will be in place within a month. Walter disappeared into the evening fog, and we never saw him again. The investigation revealed that Robert Caldwell had been building surveillance-ready houses throughout the region since the 1990s. His construction company had specialized in custom homes with unique architectural features that were actually designed to facilitate covert monitoring. Tom moved out within 2 weeks, and the house remains empty. But 12 other families are still living in Robert Caldwell's custom-built surveillance targets, and most of them have no idea they're being watched. The network is bigger than anyone realized, and shutting down individual operations only forces them to adapt and relocate. But there's something else, something that connects all these cases to a much larger operation that's still running. Have you ever felt like your house was designed to be watched? What would you do if you discovered your home's architect had ulterior motives? Sometimes the most dangerous surveillance is the kind that's built into the walls themselves. I'm a pest control specialist, and I've been in this business for 11 years. After the surveillance network discoveries across 3 counties, I started getting calls from homeowners who wanted their new properties thoroughly inspected for any hidden surprises. That's how I met Dr. Patricia Holbrook, and what we found in her basement revealed the final piece of a puzzle that connected back to everything we'd discovered. It was December 3, 2023, when Patricia called about her new house at 1892 Birch Avenue in Hillcrest. She'd bought the property from the estate of Dr. Marcus Webb, a retired entomologist who'd passed away 4 months earlier. The house had been empty since then, and Patricia was experiencing what she described as unusual spider activity. I arrived in my 2021 Ford Ranger that morning, expecting a routine spider treatment. The fog was particularly thick that day, making the whole neighborhood feel isolated and oppressive. Patricia met me at the door, visibly shaken and clutching a cup of coffee with trembling hands. "They're everywhere," she said immediately. "Not just common house spiders, exotic species I've never seen before. My neighbor mentioned this area had some connection to those surveillance cases, and I'm starting to wonder if there's something more going on." Patricia led me through the house, pointing out webs in every room. But these weren't typical spider webs in corners or ceiling joints. They were positioned at eye level, stretched across doorways, and concentrated near windows and light fixtures. The spiders themselves were unlike anything I'd encountered in residential pest control. Some were brilliantly colored, others were unusually large, and several species I couldn't immediately identify. "When did you first notice them?" I asked, examining a particularly elaborate web stretched across the living room window. 3 days after I moved in. At first I thought it was just because the house had been empty for months. But they keep appearing faster than I can remove them, and they're getting more aggressive. The house was a 1980s split level with a finished basement that Dr. Webb had apparently used as a home laboratory. As we descended the stairs, the smell hit me immediately, a musty, organic odor mixed with something chemical and sharp. The basement contained dozens of empty terrariums, each labeled with scientific names and collection dates. Glass enclosures of various sizes lined the walls, connected by a sophisticated climate control system that was still humming. But what made my blood run cold were the detailed notes describing behavioral modification experiments and something called Project Dispersal Phase 3. "Patricia, we need to evacuate the house right now," I said, reading through Webb's research notes. These weren't pets, they were test subjects. The documentation revealed that Dr. Webb had been conducting experiments on various spider species for over 15 years, modifying their behavior through controlled breeding, environmental manipulation, and what appeared to be chemical conditioning. His research focused on creating spiders that would establish webs in specific locations and exhibit unusual territorial behaviors. But the most chilling discovery was a file labeled Network Integration Biological Surveillance Assets. Webb had been working with the same surveillance network we'd discovered in Ridgeway, Clearwater, and Brookside. While Harold Mackenzie collected information and Robert Caldwell built infrastructure, Marcus Webb had been developing biological monitoring systems. His spiders weren't just research subjects, they were living surveillance equipment. He trained them to establish webs in specific locations, I explained to Patricia as we waited outside for the hazmat team I'd called. The spiders were designed to create surveillance points throughout the house and neighborhood. Webb's notes described years of breeding programs designed to create spiders that would naturally gravitate toward surveillance positions. The creatures had been conditioned to establish webs that could support tiny cameras and listening devices, creating an invisible monitoring network that would seem completely natural to anyone who discovered it. The escaped spiders had been establishing webs in every room, but not randomly. They were positioning themselves at optimal viewing angles near windows, doorways, and areas where human activity was most likely to occur. Several of the larger species had built webs that spanned entire rooms, creating perfect frameworks for mounting surveillance equipment. The other houses, Patricia realized. If Webb was part of the surveillance network, these spiders might have been placed in other locations too. When investigators checked the previous surveillance sites, they found evidence of Webb's biological program at each location. The spiders had been used to extend monitoring capabilities beyond the fixed camera positions, creating a living surveillance network that could adapt and expand on its own. Harold Mackenzie's basement files contained references to Webb's subjects and detailed notes about optimal placement of biological assets. Robert Caldwell's house designs included specific environmental features that would attract and support spider populations. Walter Brennan's equipment inventories listed biointerface devices, tiny cameras and microphones designed to be incorporated into spider webs. But the most disturbing discovery came when we traced Webb's supplier records. He'd been acquiring exotic spider species for 20 years, far more than his research could justify. The surplus specimens had been distributed to associates throughout the network, creating biological surveillance capabilities across multiple counties. There are 12 other houses in this county with Webb's modified spiders, the lead investigator told us. And we've found evidence that similar programs were running in adjacent counties. The network wasn't just collecting information, they were experimenting with new forms of surveillance that would be virtually undetectable. Biological monitoring systems that could reproduce and spread naturally, creating permanent observation posts that would survive even if the human operators were discovered. Webb's final research notes revealed the true scope of his work. He'd been developing what he called self-sustaining biological networks, spider populations that would establish permanent surveillance webs throughout neighborhoods, continuously monitoring human activity and providing mounting points for electronic surveillance equipment. The spiders had been bred for specific traits: aggression toward other spider species to establish territorial dominance, attraction to human activity areas for optimal surveillance positioning, and enhanced web-building capabilities to support electronic devices. Most disturbing of all, they'd been engineered to exhibit unusual longevity and reproductive rates. Phase 4 was supposed to be complete ecosystem integration. I read from Webb's notes. Self-replicating biological surveillance networks that could operate independently of human oversight. Patricia never moved into the house. The property was quarantined while specialists tracked down and removed Webb's experimental subjects. But we know some of the spiders escaped capture, and they're still establishing webs in neighborhoods throughout the region. The investigation revealed that the surveillance network had been developing biological, architectural, and technological monitoring systems for over 2 decades. What started as municipal workers collecting information had evolved into a comprehensive intelligence operation that touched hundreds of families across 5 counties. Webb's program had been the most insidious aspect of the network because it created surveillance capabilities that could persist indefinitely. Unlike cameras that could be discovered or operators who could be arrested, the biological monitoring systems were designed to reproduce and spread naturally. But here's what keeps me awake at night. Webb's final research notes mention successful field trials in 17 different neighborhoods. The spiders weren't just surveillance tools, they were breeding to create permanent monitoring systems that could operate independently. The human operators might be gone, but their biological surveillance network is still growing, still spreading, still watching. And unlike cameras or listening devices, these monitoring systems reproduce on their own. In the months since the investigation concluded, I've received dozens of calls from homeowners reporting unusual spider activity. The patterns are always the same: exotic species appearing suddenly, aggressive territorial behavior, and webs positioned in optimal surveillance locations. The network is still out there, evolving and adapting. We shut down the human operations, but we may have unleashed something much harder to control. Have you noticed an unusual increase in spider activity in your neighborhood? What would you do if you discovered the spiders in your house were more than just random pests? Sometimes the most persistent surveillance is the kind that's literally bred into the ecosystem around us. The surveillance network we discovered was just the beginning. The real threat isn't the people who are watching us, it's the biological systems they created that are still out there, still growing, still monitoring everything we do. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.